My name is Jake Morgan, and I thought I had a pretty straightforward life. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio, in a two-story house with a well-kept lawn and a cozy porch swing. I've been married to Linda for 15 years. I work in logistics, which keeps me busy but ensures we live comfortably. Linda used to work, but she decided to stay home a few years ago, managing the house and volunteering at the local library now and then. We made a conscious decision not to have kids. It gave us the freedom to travel on weekends and enjoy quiet evenings with friends. We have a tight-knit social circle, mostly old friends from college and a few new neighbors. Among them is Chris, an old school friend of Linda's who recently moved back to town. I've never liked Chris much. He's always seemed a bit too close to Linda, but she assured me it was just an old friendship rekindled. Life was good, or so I thought. Our house was always filled with laughter during gatherings, and Linda and I had what seemed like a solid marriage. But lately there had been a shift. Linda started acting differently, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just a phase. Little did I know, my world was about to be turned upside down. It all started with small things. Linda began spending more time on her phone, often giggling at messages and quickly putting it away when I entered the room. She'd also become more secretive about her plans. When I asked about her day, she'd give vague answers or say she was just out running errands. One evening, I noticed she was dressed unusually nice for a quick run to the grocery store. She wore makeup and her best jeans, something she never did for a simple errand. When I asked where she was going, she said she was meeting a friend from her book club. I didn't think much of it at the time, but these occurrences started becoming more frequent. Our sex life had also taken a nosedive. Linda always seemed too tired or not in the mood. She'd brush off my advances with excuses that left me feeling unwanted. I started to feel like a stranger in my own marriage, and it was eating me up inside. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I couldn't help myself. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from Chris. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." My stomach churned. Why was Chris of all people sending her such a message? I decided to confront her about it. "Linda, why is Chris texting you about meeting up tomorrow?" She barely looked at me as she toweled her hair dry. "Oh, he just needs some help with his new place. He doesn't know anyone else around here, and I'm just being a good friend." Something in her tone didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. Maybe I was being paranoid. Yet, the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't leave. Then there were the late nights out. She claimed she was catching up with old friends or attending some new social event. Each time she came back, she had that same distant look, and her explanations were always too rehearsed, too perfect. I remember one particularly cold evening when she came back hours after she said she would. She stumbled through the door, her face flushed and hair disheveled. "Lost track of time," she slurred, clearly tipsy. I helped her to bed, my mind racing with doubts and fears. I started noticing other signs too. She was suddenly very protective of her phone, never leaving it unattended. She even changed her password, something she hadn't done in years. And then there were the random bursts of laughter or whispered conversations I'd catch her having in another room. Every instinct in me screamed that something was off. I decided to keep a closer eye on her. If she was hiding something, I needed to know. I started checking our phone bill for unusual numbers and noticed she had been texting Chris a lot more than she'd let on. The pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. My suspicions grew with each passing day, and I knew I couldn't live in this limbo. I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we had built, was slipping through my fingers, and I felt powerless to stop it. It was a cold, rainy Thursday when everything came to a head. Linda had been acting more suspicious than usual, and my patience was wearing thin. She said she was going to a workshop at a friend's place, but I wasn't buying it. I decided to follow her, something I never thought I'd do. I felt a mix of guilt and determination as I trailed her car through the winding streets of our town. She parked outside a modest apartment complex on the other side of town. I watched from a distance as she walked up to one of the doors and knocked. A moment later, Chris opened the door and let her in. My heart pounded in my chest as I processed what I was seeing. This was the confirmation I dreaded. I waited for what felt like hours, though it was only about 30 minutes. The rain was pouring down, matching the storm brewing inside me. I couldn't sit there any longer. I got out of the car, the cold rain hitting my skin like needles, and marched up to the apartment. I pounded on the door with a force I didn't know I possessed. Chris opened the door, and his smug expression vanished when he saw me. "Jake, what are you doing here?" he stammered. "Where is she?" I demanded, pushing past him into the apartment. Linda was sitting on the couch, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Jake, I can explain," she started, but I was beyond listening. "Explain? Explain what, Linda? That you've been sneaking around with this piece of shit behind my back?" I roared, my voice echoing in the small apartment. Chris tried to intervene, stepping between us. "Jake, calm down. Let's talk about this." "Talk?" I laughed bitterly. "You want to talk now? After you've been screwing my wife?" Before I knew it, my fist connected with Chris' jaw, sending him sprawling to the floor. He scrambled to get up, but I was on him, the years of pent-up anger and betrayal fueling my every move. I didn't care about the consequences. I just wanted to make him feel a fraction of the pain he had caused me. Linda screamed, trying to pull me off him, but I was relentless. Chris' attempts to defend himself were pathetic, and I took a grim satisfaction in his fear. He was the reason my life was falling apart, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stopped, my knuckles bruised and bleeding. Chris lay on the floor, groaning in pain. I turned to Linda, who was sobbing uncontrollably. "You think this is over?" I spat. "You think you can just apologize and we'll go back to the way things were? You destroyed everything, Linda. Everything!" She tried to reach out to me, but I recoiled. "Don't touch me," I hissed, my voice cold and hard. "I'm done with you." Without another word, I walked out of the apartment, leaving Linda and Chris to deal with the aftermath. The rain had soaked through my clothes, but I barely felt it. All I felt was a crushing weight of betrayal and anger. My world had come crashing down, and there was no going back. I got into my car and drove aimlessly, the events of the night replaying in my mind. The realization that my marriage was over hit me like a ton of bricks. I had to figure out what to do next, how to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. But first, I needed to clear my head and find some way to process the overwhelming emotions tearing me apart. When I finally got home, the house was dark and silent. I sat in the living room, staring at the walls, trying to make sense of everything. The rage I felt toward Linda was only matched by the deep sense of betrayal that gnawed at my soul. How could she do this to me? To us? Hours passed, and I finally heard the front door open. Linda walked in, looking like a ghost. She stood there dripping wet, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Jake, please, we need to talk," she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, and felt nothing but disgust. "Talk? Now you want to talk?" I said bitterly. "What could you possibly say that would make any of this better?" She sank to her knees, sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was lonely, and Chris was there for me. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake." I shook my head, feeling the anger rise again. "A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. This was a deliberate choice, Linda. You chose to betray me." She reached out, but I stepped back. "Don't," I warned. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You made your bed, now you lie in it." Linda's tears fell freely as she pleaded. "I love you, Jake. I never stopped loving you. Please, we can work through this." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Work through this? How do you propose we do that? You've shattered my trust, our marriage. There's no coming back from this." She collapsed on the floor, crying uncontrollably. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to hold her and tell her everything would be okay. But I couldn't. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too fresh. "Get up," I said coldly. "We're done here. I'm filing for divorce." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. "No, Jake, please don't do this. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling. We can—" I cut her off. "It's too late, Linda. You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat on me. Now pack your things and get out." She looked at me, desperation in her eyes. "Please, Jake, just give me one more chance. I'll make it right, I promise." I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. "It's over, Linda. You need to leave." She sat there for a moment, then slowly got up and walked toward the bedroom. I heard her packing her things, her sobs the only sound in the house. When she finally left, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with an overwhelming sadness. I had loved her once, more than anything, but now that love was buried under layers of hurt and betrayal. As I sat alone in the dark, I realized that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. But I was determined to get through it, to find a way to rebuild my life and move on from the wreckage of my marriage. The days following Linda's departure were a blur. My mind raced with anger, sorrow, and a thirst for justice. I couldn't shake the image of her and Chris together, laughing at my expense. Every quiet moment was filled with thoughts of how to make them pay for the pain they had caused. One evening, as I sat brooding over a drink, an idea started to take shape. I remembered that Chris worked at a small marketing firm. It wasn't a particularly high-profile job, but he had built a decent reputation for himself. If there was one thing I knew, it was that reputation mattered. I decided it was time to hit him where it hurt the most: his career. I spent the next few days gathering information. I found out who his clients were, his boss, and even some of his colleagues. It wasn't hard. A few calls and some social media snooping provided me with everything I needed. I compiled a dossier of Chris's inappropriate relationship with Linda, complete with text messages, photos, and timelines. The evidence was damning. Then I made an anonymous email account and sent the dossier to Chris's boss and a few key clients. I made sure to highlight the unprofessional conduct and the potential damage to the company's reputation. I didn't hold back, ensuring that every sordid detail was included. The fallout was immediate. Within days, Chris was suspended pending an internal investigation. I heard through the grapevine that his boss was furious and that several clients had already pulled their accounts. Chris's world was crumbling, and I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that he was finally facing some consequences for his actions. But I wasn't done yet. Linda had to face her own reckoning. She had been staying with a mutual friend, hoping to avoid the shame of moving back in with her parents. I decided it was time to expose her betrayal to everyone we knew. I crafted a carefully worded email detailing her affair with Chris and sent it to our close friends and family. The responses were swift and brutal. Friends who had once admired Linda turned their backs on her. Family members expressed their disappointment and outrage. The shame and humiliation she had tried to avoid now engulfed her completely. I received a call from Linda's best friend, Emily, who was furious with Linda for betraying me. "Jake, I had no idea she was capable of this. I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with regret. "Thanks, Emily," I replied, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. It means a lot to hear that. The revenge brought me a twisted sense of closure, but it also left me feeling empty. I had dismantled their lives, but it didn't erase the pain or the betrayal. It didn't bring back the years I had invested in my marriage or the love I had lost. One night, I received a call from Chris. His voice was shaky, filled with desperation. "Jake, please, can we talk? I've lost my job, my reputation, everything. I'm begging you, let's just put this behind us." I listened to him plead, feeling a cold satisfaction. "You should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with my wife, Chris. This is on you." He was silent for a moment, then he whispered, "I'm sorry, Jake. I really am." "Sorry doesn't change anything," I replied, hanging up the phone. The revenge had been executed perfectly, but it didn't bring the peace I had hoped for. It was a hollow victory, one that left me feeling more alone than ever. I had destroyed their lives, but I still had to rebuild my own from the ashes of my marriage. A few weeks later, Linda reached out, asking to meet one last time. She sounded broken, a shadow of the confident woman I once knew. Part of me wanted to ignore her request, but another part needed closure. I agreed to meet at a small park where we used to go when we first started dating. Linda arrived, looking disheveled and worn. She sat on a bench, staring at the ground. "Thank you for meeting me, Jake," she said softly. I stayed standing, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Linda?" Tears filled her eyes as she looked up at me. "I wanted to apologize truly. I've lost everything. My friends, my reputation, even my self-respect. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how sorry I am." I felt a flicker of pity for her, but it was overshadowed by the anger and hurt. "You should have thought about that before you betrayed me," I said coldly. She nodded, wiping away her tears. I know. I was selfish and stupid. I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. But please, can we at least try to part on civil terms? For the sake of what we once had? I sighed, the weight of the past weeks bearing down on me. Linda, I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I won't hold on to the anger forever. I need to move on, and so do you. She looked relieved, a small, sad smile crossing her face. Thank you, Jake. That means more than you know. We sat in silence for a few moments, the memories of our happier times lingering in the air. Finally, I stood up, ready to leave. Goodbye, Linda. I hope you find some way to rebuild your life. Goodbye, Jake, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry for everything. As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was still anger, still pain, but there was also a sense of closure. The chapter with Linda was over, and it was time to start writing a new one for myself. The days leading up to the divorce trial were a whirlwind of preparations and meetings with my lawyer, Mr. Davis. He was a no-nonsense professional who had seen it all, and his confidence in our case was a steadying force. Despite the chaos, a sense of inevitability hung over everything. The trial was just a formality at this point. The outcome was clear, but it didn't make it any less painful. The courtroom was sterile and imposing, with its high ceilings and rows of wooden benches. Linda and I sat at separate tables, flanked by our respective legal teams. She looked exhausted, a shadow of the vibrant woman I had once loved. I felt a pang of sadness, but I quickly pushed it aside. This was about more than just us now. It was about justice and closure. The judge entered and we all stood. The proceedings began with the usual formalities, but soon enough, the real work began. Mr. Davis presented our case with meticulous detail, outlining Linda's infidelity and the impact it had on our marriage. He presented the evidence I had gathered, the text messages and photos that painted a clear picture of betrayal. Linda's lawyer tried to counter, arguing that my decision to follow her and gather evidence was an invasion of privacy, but the judge wasn't swayed. The facts were indisputable, and the truth was plain to see. Linda took the stand, her voice trembling as she tried to explain her actions. I was lonely, she said, tears streaming down her face. Jake was always working, and I felt so isolated. Chris was just a friend at first, but things got out of hand. I never meant to hurt anyone. I listened, my heart aching with a mixture of anger and pity. Her words felt hollow, but there was no denying the pain in her eyes. This wasn't the life either of us had envisioned, and now we were paying the price for our choices. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and addressed the court. I loved Linda with all my heart, I began, my voice steady. I worked hard to provide for us, to build a life together. I never imagined she would betray me like this. But despite everything, I hope we can both find a way to move forward. This divorce isn't just an end, it's a chance for a new beginning. The judge nodded, his expression serious but compassionate. After a brief recess, he returned with his verdict. The divorce was granted, and I was awarded full custody of our assets, including the house. Linda was left with a modest settlement, enough to start over, but not enough to continue the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. As the judge's gavel fell, signaling the end of the trial, a wave of relief washed over me. It was over. The marriage that had once been the cornerstone of my life was now legally dissolved. There was a strange finality to it, but also a sense of liberation. I could finally begin to heal and rebuild. Linda approached me as we were leaving the courtroom. Jake, I know I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you can forgive me, she said quietly, her eyes filled with regret. I looked at her, feeling a mix of emotions. Maybe one day, Linda. But right now, I need to focus on moving on. She nodded, tears welling up again. I understand. I wish you all the best, Jake. With that, we parted ways. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The trial was over, but my journey was just beginning. I was free to chart a new course for my life, one defined by my choices and my dreams, not by betrayal and pain. The first few weeks after the trial were surreal. The house, once filled with tension and sadness, now felt like a sanctuary. I spent my days decluttering, getting rid of old memories that no longer served me, and making space for new beginnings. I even repainted the living room, a symbolic gesture to mark this new chapter in my life. Work became a refuge, a place where I could lose myself in tasks and projects. My colleagues, aware of my situation, offered their support, and I found solace in their camaraderie. I took on more responsibilities, pushing myself to excel and reclaim a sense of purpose. But the most significant change came from within. I started therapy, something I had resisted for a long time. Dr. Ellis, my therapist, helped me navigate the complex emotions I was grappling with. He encouraged me to confront my anger, my sadness, and my fears, and slowly, I began to heal. "You need to allow yourself to grieve, Jake," he said during one session. "Only then can you truly move forward." It wasn't easy, but I took his advice to heart. I allowed myself to feel the pain, to mourn the loss of the life I had envisioned with Linda. And gradually the raw edges of my emotions began to soften. As the months passed, I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I joined a local hiking group, rediscovering my love for the outdoors. The physical exertion and the beauty of nature became a balm for my wounded spirit. Each hike was a reminder that life continued, that there was still beauty and joy to be found. One sunny Saturday morning, during a group hike, I met someone special. Her name was Emily, a kind and spirited woman who shared my love for nature. We struck up a conversation, and before long, we were laughing and talking like old friends. There was an ease to our interaction, a natural chemistry that I hadn't felt in years. We started spending more time together, and our friendship blossomed into something deeper. Emily was patient and understanding, never pushing me to move faster than I was comfortable with. She knew about my past, and she respected the boundaries I needed to heal. One evening, as we sat on my newly repainted porch, watching the sunset, Emily took my hand. "Jake, I'm here for you no matter what. I want you to know that." I looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity and warmth there. "Thank you, Emily. That means more than you know." Life with Emily was different. There was no pretense, no secrets. We communicated openly, sharing our hopes and fears, and building a relationship based on mutual respect and trust. It was refreshing and healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. As time went on, I found myself looking forward to the future again. I started planning new adventures with Emily, dreaming about the possibilities that lay ahead. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. It had become a part of my story, a chapter that had shaped me but didn't control me. Looking back, I realized that Linda's betrayal, as devastating as it was, had ultimately led me to a place of growth and self-discovery. I had learned to value myself, to recognize my worth, and to never settle for less than I deserved. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been transformative. I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and ready to embrace the new life that lay before me. And as I held Emily's hand, watching the sunset, I knew that the best was yet to come.